Good morning. Appreciate everybody being here this morning. I know there's probably other things you guys would rather be doing on a Saturday morning here in Houston. Never a dull moment in the Houston sports scene, that's for sure. But before we kind of get into the football aspect, just a quick thought. It seems like every time we get together, unfortunately, it's kind of on a sad note, but just the loss of John Clayton. I know there's probably a lot of people here that either work with John or had interaction with John, and I don't want to speak for anybody, but my guess is their interaction were nothing but positive, and just his humility, his grace, who he was as a person. To lose somebody like that, I'm sure it's a trickle-down effect on a lot of different people. So certainly thoughts to people that have a relationship with him, to his family, to the ESPN community. Probably had one of the best commercials that probably anybody's ever seen. So, but they had a way that kind of speaks to his wit and his humor. So, again, it kind of puts things in perspective when something like that happens. I think, lots happened since we got together at the Combine. I think at the Combine we talked a little bit about what was going on. It was kind of on the precipice of what was going on, the Ukraine-Russia situation. So that hasn't gone away. So I think sometimes we kind of lose context in real life and kind of what's going on. I mean, football is football, sport is sport, but I think it's important to kind of keep perspective on those types of things. As it pertains to what took place yesterday, it's probably important to kind of go back, really to the day that I was hired. Kind of said from the beginning, we're going to take things one day at a time. We're going to be patient. We're going to control the things that we can control. And I think I've been pretty consistent from the beginning, on that front. So, however long it's been, 15 months to kind of get to this point here. I think the biggest thing probably yesterday provides everybody is clarity, just in terms of direction. I think Deshaun has clarity on his end relative to what his future holds from a football standpoint. I think there's some things, still on a legal front that probably, I don't want to really get into that, but, have to take place. But just clarity for him individually. I think clarity for our organization in terms of what the expectation is moving forward, kind of what we have in place. And really what we're trying to do is just try to put together a consistent winner, put together a foundation, and put together a team that a lot of people can be proud of. People within the organization, players, coaches, front office people, the fans, most importantly. I think everybody just wanted clarity. And we said from the beginning, we're going to be patient. Going to try to be very thoughtful and just try to make the right decision for the organization. Yesterday, we felt was that opportunity, and we felt it was the right time. So that's why we went ahead and made the decision, that we did. So I think we're excited about moving forward. I think that's the big thing to take from this is to look forward, to think about what's ahead of us. I would say this. There's a lot of work that we need to get done. No question about it. We're a long way from being where we need to be. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but I think everybody's excited. Everybody is kind of anticipating the next step here in the offseason program, which should begin April 11th. We'll probably have kind of the players. We've had, I want to say, 25, 30 players here over the last 2 to 3 weeks on a consistent basis. So we're preparing for the 2022 season. So I think everybody's excited for the opportunity in front of them. I would say no one player, no one thing is going to change this organization. It's not going to happen overnight. There's a lot of work, purposeful work that's going to go into it, but I think we're heading in the right direction. The draft assets and the draft allocation, that'll kind of take care of itself, and we have a job to do on that front. But hopefully we're positioning ourselves organizationally to put ourselves in a position where you can hopefully have some success, sustainable success for a long period of time. So we're not there yet. I don't want to misconstrue what I'm saying or anybody think otherwise. But I would say where we're positioned here today, where the team is positioned currently, building on kind of the foundation that we put in place a little bit last year, some of the players that we've re-signed here in free agency, which we can certainly talk about that. Happy to address some of that here as we go. And then not looking too far ahead, but I think as it sits here today, we have almost $100 million of salary cap space at our disposal. So that could change over. There's a lot of things that could change between now and then, but I would say just where we are today, that's kind of where we're positioned. So I think it's important for us to move forward, and that's the most important thing. So, certainly start with a question. Brooks, go ahead. Why don't you ask the first question? I know everybody's probably got something they want to ask. So,
what did the trade deal that you got, the return that you got Deshaun Watson, how much did that match what your value of him was? And I guess a little bit of the process of negotiating the trade clause.
Yeah, I would say, we've talked about this a little bit. Our job, whether it's coach, player, is to ID, fix, assess, and then find solutions to whatever the perceived impediments may be. So certainly that was a part of the equation that we had to factor in. I think the impetus for kind of getting teams to the table, when you have a situation like that, was there's X number of teams that I think there would have been interest in potentially waiving that clause for. So in order to get those teams to the table, we had kind of a certain threshold of what it would take to get to that point for those initial discussions to take place. And then from there, you just kind of have to work through the trade compensation and whatever the compensation is that you feel makes the most sense. So I think you have to be thoughtful, and I think you just have to take the information, process it, and try to make the best decision at the time. So that's why we went ahead and did what we did.
Nick, with the trade, the trade clause in the process, because of his leverage of having that, how much does it have to become kind of a collaborative situation where you kind of let him have the meetings and just how that works to be able to find his team and his market?
Yeah, there were certain parameters that were put in place. So we kind of worked with David. He worked with Deshaun. So there was certainly communication early in the process, and we articulated that to the respective teams early in the week, and then the process went from there. Go ahead, Sarah.
At what point did you know Deshaun was never going to play for you guys again?
Yeah, I don't think there was any particular point in time. So again, like I've said from the beginning, kind of one day at a time. So what the future holds, I mean, sort of to a certain extent out of my control, out of anybody's control the things that we can control. So, I don't want to speak for him about what his intentions were or whether or not those were going to change. So my responsibilities to our organization is continue to be that as long as I'm in my position. So I think that's the most important thing for all of us to recognize and just to move forward.
But did that change? Did anything change for your perspective between when he first asked for a trade and when the lawsuits were filed?
No, I think we took it one day at a time. I think you guys we've talked multiple times. Take everything one day at a time, take the information, process it, and try not to project about what may or may not happen. So that's kind of how we try to approach it. And I think, like we've talked about this previously, kind of create two separate buckets, right? Kind of keep that bucket over here while also trying to maintain our focus on running the football team. And so the players and coaches during the season, that was their focus. Ultimately, this was kind of my responsibility with the blessing of ownership to kind of handle this situation, and that's what I've tried to do.
Has this changed your perspective or the team's perspective on no trade clauses? And what do you make of the idea of weaponizing a no trade clause to force a trade rather than to make it block?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say whatever took place prior to my arrival, I certainly can't control. What I'm going to try to do is do what I feel is best for organization and whatever that entails. So whether it's contract front, contract structure, a lot of that too comes down to negotiation with the other side. And, there's always going to be, even during free agency, if we want to look at that in kind of real time, there's going to be a little bit of a give and take, certainly. A player thinks he's worth X, we think he's worth Y. Okay, what are the things that are most relevant? What are the things that are most pressing? What are the things that are really most important to you, said player, in order to consummate an agreement? So that's part of my responsibility, part of that dialogue with whoever that party is on the other side. So again, my responsibility is to try to do the best thing for the organization and do what I think is right, and then make that, provide that information to ownership. And ultimately, from a football operations standpoint, if it pertains to adding players to the team, that's going to be something that ultimately I'm going to have to continue to make sure that I make the right decisions. Go ahead, one more. Go ahead, one follow-up. Yep.
About player relationships, is there like a lesson to be learned organizationally about how you guys cultivate those relationships, especially with your star players? There's an argument that maybe why they have to come to this, so that's what they had. Like, did you guys learn a lot there and like how you build your relationships with your star players?
Yeah. The goal of any good organization is to try to have success collaboratively. So, and you have to rely on everybody. You can't make it about one person. If you make it about one person, it takes it out of the context of the team. And I would say with football specifically, there's 53 players, and then when you add the practice squad players, you're talking about 70 players that are impacting on a day-to-day basis. And then the relationships between those players, the relationships with the, call it 20 or so coaches, and then the relationships with the people outside of the football operation. So all those relationships are going to be important. So I think the best practice is to maintain open dialogue, have open communication, support each other, and if there's a difference of opinion on something, try to come up with some degree of a resolution. And again, like we talked about a little bit earlier, this is a solutions-based business. So it's about finding solutions. It's about trying to provide answers to questions that you think make the most sense for everybody. So, I think every day is an opportunity for us to learn something and just try to make good decisions and try to install best practices. But in the end, the goal organizationally is to try to win and you can't do that unless you're doing it collectively as a group. So that's what our players want, that's what our coaches want, that's what our fans want, quite frankly. And, Lovey's talked about that, the importance of our fans. They just want to see a good product on the field with good players, and they want to see a team operate, very functionally. So that's hopefully what we're going to be able to do here moving forward. There's no crystal ball. There's no magic dust that you can wave on it. So we just kind of take it one day at a time and just try to work. I mean, I've said this before. It's really about the work. It's about the work that we put in. It's about the work that we do in the offseason. It's about the work that we do on the field. And ultimately, it's going to lead to hopefully a good result on the field. Go ahead, right here in front. Yep.
We know about the Final Four teams.
Go ahead. Yep. Go ahead. Go. Yep. Yep, we'll kind of work on it. Everybody will get a chance. Yeah, Kim will get a chance. Yeah, don't worry. Go ahead.
Now that you all have moved on from Deshaun Watson and traded him, does that mean that now Davis Mills has a piece of the franchise, or is a quarterback still in play for you all going into the draft next month?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't jump to any conclusions, I would say, specific to Davis. Davis had opportunities last year. Did a nice job with those opportunities, but we're kind of starting from scratch here a little bit. I would say when you get into the draft, you really don't want to necessarily eliminate any one particular position or any one particular player. You just want to look at it in totality and just figure out what makes the most sense, for your organization. So it's about picking good players. It's about picking the right players that you think fit what you're trying to do. So we'll look at everything. We're knee deep in that right now. We have another kind of 5 or 6 weeks left until we get to the draft, but working through that process. But, Davis has certainly earned an opportunity here, and I'd say that's kind of the extent of what he's earned. But I think he's excited about the chances that he has in front of him, and kind of we'll see how it all unfolds. So go ahead, Kim, and then Vanessa.
Yeah, Nick, we know that there were kind of the quote-unquote Final Four teams that presented packages that you thought were adequate and that others you thought was adequate. But how many teams initially were interested or did you get calls from before those Final Four?
Yeah, I would say there was a fair amount of teams. I think the teams, what we try to do is bring the teams that had, I would say, a legitimate interest, and that was kind of based on, I would say, maybe the compensation that was presented, kind of going back to the earlier question Brooks asked. I think there was a certain threshold that I kind of had established in order to make it a legitimate discussion, and if we got to that point, then we can engage a little bit further. So, I would say I don't want to get into the exact number, but, it was probably a few more than, however many teams that everybody was reporting on here at the end. So.
How much do you think that this situation with Deshaun and losing a franchise quarterback has set this franchise back? And how much do you think these draft picks you got in exchange for them will help get you guys back on the right track?
Yeah, we can't really worry about what's happened in the past. We're kind of here, present day and time. So, look, we've won 4 games over each of the last 2 seasons. So there's certainly opportunity and room for improvement. So our job is to try to continue to bring good players into our program, give them the opportunity to have success on the field. And really, it's going to come down to how well we can execute on Sundays and how many games that we win. So it's not going to be one particular player, one particular pick, where we pick that player. Good players come throughout the draft. Good players come in the draft through all rounds. Good players come for other teams. Good players come in for agency. There's been plenty of players in this league that weren't drafted that are some of the better players in their position. So you really don't want to kind of pigeonhole yourself and say, well, if we don't do this with this pick, it's going to be, it's going to put the organization in a difficult situation. So that's all we can deal with is the truth, and this is where we are right now. So I think the most important thing is, like I talked about from the beginning, excited about the opportunity to move forward. There's a lot of work ahead of us, but, I think we're in a better position, maybe than we were previously, just because there's clarity for everybody involved.
And to build on that, is there any sense of relief or kind of, I don't know, just the exhale of not having this hanging over your head since you've had it for a few months?
Maybe for you guys. No, I think the most important thing is clarity. Everybody just has clarity. Everybody just has an understanding of where we stand. So I think that's the most important thing for all of us to understand and recognize. So we managed the situation probably as best we could. Again, I try to probably take the burden and the responsibility on my shoulders, because really ultimately it was going to kind of be something that I was going to have to deal with and handle. So, try to take it off the players, try to take it off the coaches, try to take that take that focus there off of them and let them focus on the things that they do well, which is playing and coaching football.
Two things. Veteran quarterbacks. Are you looking at any? I know that
Excuse-
veteran quarterbacks. Are you thinking about bringing anybody in? Have you looked at anybody?
Yeah, we'll look at all of our options, what those entail. So, again, there's no, I would say, set timeline or set deadline. I think right now we're at about, call it 68, 69 players on the roster. So, at some point, we're probably going to have further additions here to the team, whether it's over the next few weeks. Obviously, we're going to have new players on the team here at the end of April. And then between now and the start of the season, there's a lot of things that could potentially happen. So we're certainly cognizant of everything that's going on in the league. You know, we've done a lot of work. You know, we'll look at every option, and ultimately, you know, we'll do what we feel is best for our situation.
When Colin Kaepernick was in town, is he somebody you would look at, and did any of your personnel staff take a look at him while he was in town this week?
Yeah, that's not something that I was aware of, or, you know, where he was. So again, we'll do whatever we think is best for our organization, and we'll look at whatever the options are, you know, wherever they come from. Let's give somebody else a question here that hadn't yet.
First-round picks, historical return, just based on history of the NFL. But there were reports out there that you were looking for maybe some players too. Just the thought of not getting maybe some established players back in the return.
There's always reports out there, right? So, yeah, I would say there was really never kind of, I would say, other than 3 first-round picks, I would say probably the rest of it was, you know, a little bit of speculation. So you just try to look at, okay, what do you think makes the most sense? And not to go stock market here, but the market's the market. So whatever the market says, you can't create the market. So sort of the market is whatever the market is. So you have to take that information and, okay, whatever the market says it is, that's what the market says it is. You can't make up a market. You could have a market in your own mind. Well, it should be X. Well, if it's Y, then it goes back to kind of what we were talking about, you know, with Jerome a little bit earlier. Just find a resolution. Okay, what's the solution? Say so, you know. So I'd say we'll see how it goes. But again, there wasn't a, I would say, set number that, you know, we were, you know, was important.
The second you stepped in, Deshaun Watson was unhappy. There were reports that he wanted a trade. Not to look back, but looking forward and controlling what you can control. How confident are you that moving forward, you won't find yourself in a position where once you acquire a player of that caliber, he's not going to want to be a Houston Texan?
Yeah, I think nothing's guaranteed, so I don't want to sit here and say that anything's guaranteed. But I mean, the hope is that when we bring players in the organization, they want to be a part of what we're doing, and I think we've seen some of that in free agency. My interactions and discussions with agents, there's players that want to come to Houston. There's players that want to be in our program. There's players that want to play for Lovey. There's players that want to play with the players that we have in our program. So our job is to try to go out and find players that fit the profile of what we're looking for, of the team that we're trying to create, of the team that we want to be, and be able to identify those players and then bring them into the building. And then once they are in the building, then our job is to develop them, is to coach them, is to give them an opportunity to have success. So each case is different. Each player is different. You never want to kind of put everybody in the same box, but the players that want to come to Houston, they want to be in Houston for a reason, hopefully, and our job is to go out there and find the players that want to be here and hopefully want to be part of a successful program.
Yes, I'm saying, like, when you kind of want you, like, throwing you under the bus or anything, but do you ever, like, just kind of gather yourself and you go home, you're having to fill phone calls, you're having to look at salary cap stuff, you're, you know, functioning without draft picks last year, and you just say, man, I would have done this a lot different before had I been here earlier?
It's all about finding solutions. So you take the information, and you can't change what's happened, right, Landry? So here's the information, here's the situation. Nobody's going to make excuses. Sorry, my friends, nobody's going to bitch and moan about your situation and your circumstances. It's okay. Let's deal in the real, let's deal in now. Let's identify problems, let's provide solutions, and understand that we're going to have to find ways to fix it and make it work. And if that doesn't work, then let's turn the page. I think you have to be very flexible. You got to be able to pivot to something different. Maybe the way you thought originally it was going to go, it doesn't go that way. Okay, well, then you got to be able to adjust and adapt. So I think that's the beauty of the challenge, and I think every team deals with that. Every circumstance is different. Every situation is going to be different. Every team is going to have to deal with something, and that's okay. So I think that's where I would say there's some intrigue in that, and really you want to try to put something together. You obviously have an idea in your mind of how you want that to look. And it might take a little bit longer than you thought, but you can't erase or fix what has happened in the past. It's out of my hands. It's out of my control. We're not going to make excuses about what's happened. There's a lot of good things that I would say have taken place in this organization. You know, and everybody's kind of focused on some of the things that have happened, but there's been a lot of good things. There's a lot of good players here for a long time. So our job is to try to find solutions. Okay, take the next step and then move the organization forward. And that's my commitment to everybody in our building. That's my commitment to the fans, and that's my commitment to the organization. That's my commitment to ownership. And I'll be damned if I don't go down swinging.
We have time for a few more before Brett. We're going to go to Cody, and then we'll do all three.
And we have enough time. I mean, I'm fine. I mean, yeah, we can take as many as we need to.
Additional pick you guys got more of a sense of urgency from you and your scouting department to make sure you guys hit on those picks, especially considering you trying to match the value of what Deshaun Watson brought into the organization?
Yeah, it depends how you define that. Really, it's about just bringing good players into your program because we've talked about this previously. Regardless of how good the player you think he is in college, they're all essentially starting from scratch. So once they walk in the building, they're back to ground zero. So how quickly do they assimilate your program? How quickly can they get up to speed with what you're going to ask them to do on a football field? How well do they play? So you're not going to force feed a player in a position where maybe he's not quite ready for. So, we take a lot of pride in the work that we put in. I'd say our college scouting staff, those guys have, and, they've worked very hard all year. We've had a lot of good discussion, a lot of good dialogue. So our job is to know as many players top to bottom. And as we go to set the board here and position ourselves accordingly, just try to pick good players that we think are going to fit the program that we're trying to build. Good players that give us an opportunity to have success here moving forward.
Nick, when you kind of look right now, getting rid of Deshaun, moving on, that kind of gave you just a little bit more comfort to do what you wanted to do from the get-go, that this isn't kind of hanging over your head?
Yeah, again, it's about moving forward. So we kind of know where we are here today. We know what the opportunity looks like in front of us. We're going to try to work hard, and we're going to try to, honestly, it doesn't necessarily change. We're still going to take it one day at a time. Nothing's going to happen overnight. We're not all of a sudden going to draft 8 players all at once that are going to come in here and, do things on the field that nobody expected. So take it one day at a time, try to have good processes in place, try to do a good job here in free agency. If there's an opportunity to add players to our team that we think can help us, try to do a good job in the draft, try to do a good job in post-draft free agency, try to get our players ready for the off-season program, have a good OTA, take some time off in the summer, come back in training camp ready to go with a sense of urgency, with a heightened awareness of we got to go out there, we got to perform, we got to play well, and whoever our first opponent is, which I don't know, that'll be the next discussion when the schedule comes out, whoever we play. But whoever we play, we're going to be ready to go, and it's going to come down to do we go out there and play well enough and give ourselves the best chance to win on Sunday? Because in the end, that's what it's going to come down to. So that's the only thing anybody's going to care about.
With the guys that you were able to get back on the roster, Willie Collins was get back, and he did that, and back to Desmond King. Also getting those guys, and also the addition of Reese Maven and other folks.
Yeah, good question. Let's start with our guys first. I think the guys that we brought back, and it was more than the guys that you mentioned, but, guys like JB, guys like Kirko, guys like Desmond, guys like Malik Collins, those guys are experienced players, did a lot of good things for our program, have a presence about and provide good leadership. I would say Jalen Reeves Maven is a player we actually identified last year in free agency, had an opportunity, or tried to sign him, and at the time it didn't work itself out. So he's a player that has some of the traits and characteristics that fit our program. So I think when you specifically guys like Malik, guys like JB, the Kirko, as we're going to onboard new players onto our team, a lot of young players. So having players like that can provide that leadership, that can provide that direction. Rex Burkhead, throw him into that category. So when the players walk in the building and say, what do we ask of a Houston Texan? What are some of the traits and characteristics and behaviors that we want to embody? When you look at those players, those are the things that we want those rookies to see. So you want those rookies to have some of the same qualities, but obviously this is all going to be new for them. So I would say that was certainly part of the team building process as we added those players back to our team and as we added new players to our team as well.
You mentioned the threshold question too that to do with each other. After you had the threshold, was there a moment after that or in the process where you were prepared to hold on for another year or wait? And then, since you were able to get the trade done, how aggressive do you think you'll be with the space that's there now that his salary's off the cap?
No, that's a good question. So it really, you have to look at it this way. So however many rookies we draft or how many players we draft, let's call it 8 to 10 players. So those players are probably going to cost, on the cap, kind of $10 to $12 million ish, right? So if we're at 28, those guys are going to cost maybe 10 to 12. Turns by the time they sign that contract, the first year cap hit. And then in season, your operating budget, you need to allocate about $6 or $8 million for practice squad, injured reserve, those types of things. So there's a decent chunk right there. Call it, do the math here real quick, 16 to 18 million that you want to make sure that you have available. So it doesn't preclude you from going out and adding another player. It might be at the expense of maybe a player that's here currently. So, we're going to be certainly conscious and I'd say fairly fiscally responsible as we go through. So we're not going to be haphazard. So we want to be able to kind of work through the season. But if there's an opportunity that we think makes sense for us to add a player to add to our team, then we're not going to bypass that. We'll kind of come up with another solution. So once we get through the season, then kind of looking ahead to next year, there's going to be a vast amount of cap space that's available. So I'm sure everybody's expecting us from free agency to go out there and sign the highest paid players, but we'll deal with that next year. But anyways, there's definitely a logical progression in a process that, just want to be responsible, and ultimately that's something that, I certainly have to be conscious of. That's kind of my responsibility to the organization and to ownership.
And then, but with the threshold there, were there moments that you were prepared to hold on for another year that wasn't met, or?
No, we were prepared to make the decision that was right for the organization, so that's why we went ahead and did what we did.
Nick, all you guys have said you're going to do what's best for the organization, knowing you're a bit of an analytical guy. When will you know if this was a success? Like, how will you gauge that? When will you know?
That's not for me to judge. So I think it's take it 1 year at a time. Just take it one day at a time. And I'd say the big thing really for us is we just need to make progress. I mean, the most important thing is try to make progress. How quickly is that progress going to take place? That's certainly irresponsible for me to make that projection. But I think we just need to make progress. You've got to move in the right direction. Ultimately, if you don't do well enough, in the end, there's going to be somebody else sitting in this chair. So, I mean, it's going to come down to how well we play in the field. How quickly is that going to take place? There's always a lot of variables and factors that can go into that. So definitely excited about what we have in front of us, excited about the opportunity to work with Lovey and the staff, and excited about the team, once we put that together here. So try to take it one day at a time, try not to have any unreasonable expectations, but, ultimately the goal is to win and try to have success on the field. So the quicker we get there, probably the better for everybody involved. So I think that's what everybody wants to hear. But, I'm not very good when it comes to gambling. I think I've been to Vegas one time, and I won't even go to the slot machine. So you're asking the wrong person when it comes to things like that. What do we got? Maybe one or two more?
Yeah, Nick, you got a plethora of draft picks. Let us walk in your mind right now and try to figure out what part of the show you're going to start shopping.
Yeah, I don't think there's any one particular formula. I would say how we've handled it is once we kind of set the board. So this is really more of kind of a draft discussion. So we'll go through it vertically, kind of position the players accordingly, and it's value of the player relative to what we think the role is going to be. And realistically, the grade that we assign to that player, you're probably saying by the second year, here's what we think is going to be. So let's say you think, okay, 62 is a third tackle or swing tackle with the potential to be a starter, okay? So if you've evaluated that player, when you draft him, wherever you draft him, the expectation is going to be able to perform at that level, whenever that is, hopefully by the second year. So stack the board vertically, put the players accordingly, and then we'll work horizontally and then go across positions and say, okay, what player makes the most sense when we have an opportunity to pick? And then when it comes to kind of moving up and down the board, then it's based on supply and demand of the position that's actually available. So if you move back from a player, let's say you really like a player that you're set to pick at wherever we're going to pick, let's just say 3, okay? If you feel that's the right thing to do and that makes the most sense, you go ahead and pick. If you're going to move back, okay, how far you move back, and that's at the cost of how many other players are we going to use. So it's not necessarily about specific players. It's just about finding the right fit for what we're trying to do. So I know I didn't really answer your question, but hopefully that kind of gives you just philosophically.
Move from the third pick to move down to pick up some more picks for this season.
We'll look at everything. Again, it goes back to what are you moving away from and what do you get in return. So even though we did a trade yesterday, the thought process isn't necessarily any different than when you get into the draft. So what's the cost associated with that trade? What are you actually going to get in return? Okay, does it make sense for where you are at the present time? If it does, go ahead and do it. If it doesn't, then you go ahead and pick. You always have to be prepared to pick a player, regardless of where you're positioned. So we'll be ready to pick a player whenever that is.
Okay, we'll close with Brian, Ari, and Landry.
Brian, Ari, Landry. Okay, got it.
Nick, I just wanted to ask you, have you gotten a chance to talk to Deshaun Watson since the trade has happened?
We've had some communication. I shot him a text, and just wish him well. He'll probably do good things for the city of Cleveland. So it's kind of ironic he's going to a place where I grew up. But he'll do a lot of he's a great player. He'll do a lot of great things for the city. So certainly wish him well in his future endeavors.
And with so many NFC teams that wanted him and wanted to acquire him, what made you all decide to just go with Cleveland? Feeling the AFC, somebody that you could face potentially down the road in the playoffs.
Yeah, ultimately, just whatever you feel is the right decision for your organization at the present time, that's what you have to go ahead and do. So that's why we did what we did.
So from a fan standpoint, you
I'm not worried about the ticket package. I am, but I'm not. No, it's not about, and I think this is what's important. Everybody wants to make it about one person, one player, one particular thing, and that's important. But the most important thing is having a good team. So it's about having good players, having a good team, and then the team is what the fans are going to respond to. Do you have a good team? Can you go out there and support the team? So I would say, just philosophically, my belief is about having a good team, not trying to make it about one individual. Do you need good players? Absolutely. Like, there's no question. You need good players, and you want players that have a connection, with the fan, and the fans can root for, and that's why they come. They come to cheer. They come to support. They want to see us do well. So try not to make it about one player. So it's going to take time. Nothing's going to happen overnight. I mean, this isn't about one player. It's about one draft. It's not going to be about one particular thing. It's going to be a accumulation of things over time, and if we do enough of the right things, then hopefully we put ourselves in a position where we have a product on the field that the city of Houston can be proud of.
You like cross-sport, comparisons. We see stuff like this in the NBA all the time, like the Deshaun thing. We really haven't seen it with a player of his caliber and playing that position doing this. Do you think this is going to be like a trend? Like, could the NFL be trending towards an NBA situation where a star player is upset and all of a sudden he leverages not just getting out, but where he goes and choosing his destination?
Yeah, Landry, I don't think it's an apples-to-apples comparison. I think every situation is going to be a little bit different. So, what happens in one sport in one particular area, does that have relevance to another sport? I think that's a hard question to answer. So that's probably more something for you guys to talk about on the radio than for me to worry about. So I'm just going to try to run the football team to the best of my ability on a day-to-day basis. All right.